So this week I thought it'd be interesting to meet up with Bernt Johansson. Bernt is absolutely one of the best flycasters in the world. I think at the last World Championships, he won 2 gold medals. I know in England he won the 5-weight gold medal. He is also catches a lot of very big fish in Sweden, and he enjoys swimming. How are you, Bernt?
I'm all good. Yeah.
So
Thanks for the introduction.
So let's talk about the swimming.
Yeah, well, actually, I don't know. The water was pretty green, wasn't it?
It was. Well, let me explain what happened. So after the World Championships in Estonia, Bernt thought it would be a good idea that we went swimming. No, I didn't think it was such a good idea. I personally was quite happy just hanging around and drinking a few beers. But as we were flying through the air together, heading towards the water, I thought it would be an excellent idea that I would actually like to go swimming after all. And quite a few other people went in afterwards. I think Lasse went in afterwards, but instead of hitting the water, he actually landed in a boat.
There was actually Stefan who landed in the
Oh,
boat.
Stefan, was it?
Yeah, and Sakari who landed in the water.
Great.
Yeah, I recall this. This was actually quite fun because I remember sitting at I think it was the banquet at the World Championships.
Yeah.
And me and Sakari were like, having a few beers, having a few laughs, and then I don't know who actually came up with the idea. If it was
Well, it wasn't
me,
me.
him, or someone else. No, it was definitely not you because you weren't even involved by then. And then we said, well, we should chuck Paul into the water. And then I also remember us sort of picking you up, carrying you down to the water. And you were kind of like cool with it all. And I thought we're just gonna chuck him in, go back have a beer. That's gonna be fun. But then you started making resistance, right? It kind of turned into this MMA kind of thing, and everyone was a little bit. I mean, you're quite a small guy, if I put it that way. And then I remember we were like everyone was a bit all of a sudden insecure, like how we're gonna do this. So I just decided, no, I'm just gonna run up, man hug the guy, and jump into the water. Do you remember the markings I got on the face as well?
Instant karma. Instant
Yeah,
karma.
yeah. it was a lot of fun though. And I think since then, at every World Championship event, there has been plans to chuck me into the water, but they never managed so far.
So you didn't go swimming in Norway?
I didn't go swimming in Norway. I didn't go swimming in Cumbria either. But I've heard people saying that they were looking for you. I'm like, all right.
Great. Well, I think next time we'll have to make that happen. So
Yeah.
how was the World Championships? How was it for you? And I mean, you did fabulously well. You had 2 gold medals. That's right?
Yeah. I took the gold medal in sea trout distance and salmon distance, and then I came fourth in the 5-weight and in trout distance. So yeah, it was amazing. I mean, the results were fantastic, but I really didn't think I would do very well because me and 2 friends, we'd been fishing up in a pretty remote location, like hiking out for a few days, and then I got sick. So I got sick in the tent. So I was sort of and I got really sick. I was lying there in the tent, almost thinking I'm kind of dying. But it wasn't really that bad, but and it turned out I gotten this Campylobacter thing in my stomach, which is quite serious.
Yeah.
You get it from, like, I don't know, birds normally. I think the most common way of getting it is like eating chicken that hasn't been cooked properly or something.
Oh, okay.
But I hadn't eaten any chicken, so I got it from the water actually, and I ended up bedridden for 3.5 weeks. The first day I could so for 3.5 weeks my body couldn't sort of take on any nutrients whatsoever. So I lost 12 kilos weight,
Oh,
and the first day I was feeling better, when my body was actually able to to sort of do anything with the food I was eating was the day before that we traveled to Norway for the World Championships. So I couldn't practice, I couldn't prepare, I couldn't anything. But I think I went there then also not expecting anything, so I was pretty relaxed, and and then it just went really, really well.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So what happened in the 5-weight? Because you normally I mean,
well, it was tight.
Right, it was tight.
It was super tight. Conditions were very even among all of the contestants in the finals. I think the winner had 43.5 meters and then 40.5. And I had 42.5, 42.5, 42.5. I mean, if I would have cast 1 meter further, I would have won it. And now I was fourth. It was so
That's very
tight. Like I think gold and silver and bronze all had the same longest cast, and then they were separated by the second longest cast.
Wow.
Or something like that. It was super tight.
Wow.
And they were casting really well. I mean, Harald from Norway, who won it, he was casting really, really well, like fantastically well. So
yeah. Oh, well, that's really great. And I mean, and you were saying, I think you set some records as well. You had is it a sea trout record that was in Sweden?
Well, they changed. I mean, they changed the rules now to set the official world records. You have to measure the wind. Right. They were measuring the wind at the World Championships, but they weren't measuring it well enough, so they didn't allow for any records to be set during. Because they couldn't measure the wind correctly. I won the sea trout with 57, which was a great result. But I did like the summer before when we had the Swedish, I think it was the Swedish Championships in Stockholm, or it was just a regular competition. I'd been training. I normally don't train sea trout or salmon much at all. I practice my 5-weight. That's what I do. That's my main thing, right? But I had noticed that I'd started casting a bit because Ulrich, he's really good in the sea trout event, and we practiced together. And I noticed I started being able to sort of cast further than him in practice. So I kind of knew I had something going, but I think perhaps I'd done 58 or something as my best result ever. And then we went to the Swedish Championships. I warmed up, and I could feel that I was casting really, really well. Yeah. And then at the qualification round, I did 66.2 meters, which is, I think I increased the Swedish record by 9 meters. And it wasn't the only cast, to be honest. My whole round every cast was over 60. I think 62, and then that one just never stopped flying. It was, of course, we had really, really good conditions, really good wind conditions. You need that if you, but still, it was.
Yeah, because I don't even really remember. I don't think were you in the finals before?
In the World Championships?
Yeah, in the.
Yeah, I mean, in Cumbria, I was also in the finals together with what's his name again? Ranel Kemits from Estonia, and together with anyways, and so I took the bronze in Cumbria.
Okay. Yeah, it's something I haven't. I mean, like you, it's not one of the ones I practice very much, but it's something I think when you're going all that way, it's a long way to go just for one competition. So I've kind of been, spreading it out a little bit. But
you want to enter all of the events if you can. I mean, at least.
So, I mean, one of the things I think that makes Sweden so good, because it's always been very competitive, is the fact that you've got this team, and
I mean,
train together. So
I mean, Stefan is like, he's our godfather, so to say. He's the one who started everything. So we owe him a lot of credit for that. I mean, he basically taught everyone. And when I started practicing, because I mean, I've been fishing since I was 14. Grew up not too far from a river, so it's kind of a natural thing to get into. And but then I moved and came here, started living here in Piteå, and I heard rumors about some nerds who were indoors in the winter practicing to become better at fly fishing. And I was like, I need to go check that out. So it was Stefan, it was Magnus Hedman, Fredrik Hedman, and Ulrich. Those were the main people. There was a few others as well. So besides sort of getting all of the help from all of them to improve my casting, I could also like visually sort of imitate So I looked at Frederick and saw how he was casting. I'm like, I want to be able to do that. And I looked at Ulrich and how he was using his body movements much more. And I kind of combined those two techniques in the beginning to form kind of my own style of casting in the 5 weight. So
And how far were you casting when you first went there?
I don't know, I probably 20, 28, 29 meters or something like that.
So
But it didn't take me very long. I remember because I started, I don't know, maybe this time of year, sort of, February or something. And then come summer, May, when we can go outside casting, I think I did 37 meters.
Okay.
So I increased from like 28, 29 to 37 just in a
Wow,
3 months.
that's very quickly. And something that I mean, so somewhat one of the things that really interests me is, and I think it's really something interesting to talk about, is particularly coming out of Sweden, is you've got this, like, I call it the 2-step, where you use open stance on the back cast, and then you reverse and then you go what we now call close stance on the forward cast. So there's actually like a shuffle of the feet. And I mean, I think anybody now who's spent any time in this will have tried it, because I mean, for me, when a couple of the Swedish team are doing this, they're not, they're not doing this simply to look cool. They're doing this because they think they've measured it, right? So I think anybody who's seen that will have in the World Championships will have done it. And I mean, well, I'd like to talk about that, but for me, the reason it works is because you've got this fantastic, one of the reasons you've got this fantastic haul on the back cast, and then because you've turned around, you've got this fantastic haul on the forward cast. There's also some translation as well and weight shift. And I would suspect, if it wasn't for the fact that we're casting over these sort of pontoons that move around, which, like, if you put your weight down on the front, I used to be close stance to close stance for the step in Norway, and then I realized if I do this and I put my foot down, the platform goes down and I'm in danger of going straight over the front, right?
Yeah.
But I'm sure if it was I'm sure that if we were on a hard ground by now, I think that would be a very common technique now that you guys are using. I would love to hear how it's kind of developed and how that evolved.
I think it's still evolving, to be honest. I mean, I'm still doing small tweaks and testing different things. I mean, because we practice a lot of indoors in the winter, which means you get no wind, because when you're practicing outdoors, you can have one session that just everything works really well, right? And you have another one with, it feels like it's similar wind conditions, but then, it doesn't work at all. And it's the humidity, the air pressure, who knows exactly why, but there's something like if I almost call it, like, when the air is heavy, it's difficult to cast really far. And indoors we get the same conditions every time.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a bit drier, when it's really cold outside, the air is a bit drier indoors and vice versa. But the variables that change are very, very few, small. Which means you can really tweak things, right? You can really, I can have 1-2 hour session where I'm basically just testing one little thing and sort of tweaking it to see what happens. And I can reproduce, I can see, all right, I did this, that happened. I try something out, I go back and the same thing kind of happens again. So you can really tweak things. And so in the beginning, I was doing, turning all the way around, turning my head and everything in the back cast. So looking at the loop going backwards. Still do that sometimes, but now I'm mostly not looking at my back cast. And it's because I want to, I want to remove, I want to be able to explode forward without having any body movements sort of doing anything for me. So and indoors it has a huge effect. Like I'm consistently casting longer casts indoors when I'm not turning around. Then again, sometimes when I do, I still hit those really long casts. But so I'm kind of working on removing a few unnecessary movements, if you put it that way.
What is your indoor casting with the 5 distance? What distance is that?
I mean, right now, because we're practicing every Sunday, 2 hours. Right now, I'm quite consistently between 38 and 39 meters indoors.
Meters. How many is that in feet?
Well, it's 130 what something.
Hang on, 39 meters. 127 feet. That's
Ah,
fantastic. Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, I've always thought that. I mean, do you get cast? Do you ever get cast that go much more than that?
I mean, yeah, it happened once. I did 41.9 meters indoors once. It only happened once ever, um, which is quite, it's a lot further than those 38, 39.
Yeah, sorry, hang on. 41. I've got to. I'm terrible. I only think in feet for these things. So 41
41.9.
is
Yeah,
137 feet. Yeah, that's
yeah.
absolutely huge. I didn't even know that was
But
possible.
that only happened once.
Yeah,
I mean, I've never been past 40 meters other than that one time.
indoors.
Uh,
Yeah,
indoors.
but that's
I've been,
amazing
I've
because
been,
it tells
yeah,
it tells you it's possible, doesn't it?
yeah, it does, yeah.
I
And you
mean,
go like, you think like, what was that thing? What happened that one time
yeah,
that I'm not able to reproduce now? So,
that is
but back
incredible.
then, I mean, if I compare my sort of, since I do this practice sessions indoors every week, you can. I mean, it's easy to think. One of the problems I've had in the past is that I always measured my sort of progression by the longest cast I did, right?
Hmm.
So it was always that thing of like beating my personal best indoors, and I kind of measured my success by that. I don't do that anymore. Now I measure it more on the average, because if I have a session and I'm doing 34s, bam, 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 and then I have one really long cast, I go away feeling like, yes, I'm progressing. But I didn't. It's moving that 34, that the normal length of the casting. That's what progression for me is about now,
Yeah,
getting
yeah,
consistency.
yeah.
Um,
But it is always
because I mean, yeah,
I
sorry.
I agree with that, but it is always interesting. So I've always found that, and the problem is I have rarely been indoors. I've never really had that. The only time I threw indoors was down in Texas with Rick, who had this barn, and he would do the same, by the way, as you. He would only cast indoors. I remember they were playing hockey in there, and I was down there with Bill, and we were waiting to go, and we thought we'll just have a cast outside under the streetlights. And Rick didn't want to because he was worried that the wind would mess up his stroke because he competes indoors, and so he only wanted to cast indoors because he didn't want to get any other movement sort of into his cast. He really wanted to restrict it. So I found that very interesting. You said the same thing, that you can really work on those small things.
Yeah,
Uh,
and what I've done as well is I have two distinct different techniques I'm using.
yeah,
I have the one where I actually turn around, right?
yep,
And when we're outdoors, I use that if there's really strong wind,
yep,
like really strong, not just big winds, but really strong winds. Because when there's really strong winds, you need to be able to get your carry up like that. That's how you win the game in wind.
mm,
The longest carry will win more or less, and in strong winds. Whereas when you don't have those strong winds, it's not the same thing. It's not about the yeah, you can carry too much when there's no wind, but when there's hard wind, you can't carry too. If you can get it through in the back cast, that every meter extra in the back cast is like 2 or 3 meters extra in your delivery.
So
Um,
is your backcast stroke different? I mean, it's not just watching it because you must have turned. So so when you're looking, you've turned and you've made your back cast. Let's say there's a wind there. When you're casting indoors, I assume that you're just not using as much speed because you haven't got to overcome the wind. Or are you still using the same stroke but just not looking?
yeah, I'd say, well, not there are differences. I should record myself and see exactly what the differences are.
Right.
I know that the mental, like the thing I have in my head that I always think about is that when I don't turn, uh, I need to aim the backcast higher in my mental state. When I don't go high with the backcast, but the thinking is that the feeling, the movement is that I'm going higher, because then I get the right sort of trajectory on the back cast. Whereas when I turn around, of course, I can see where it's going, so I don't have to think about that. And there's a difference there. I know when I kind of forget about that one thing, I'm not casting as well. But then I it clicks in my head. I'm like, yeah, I need to have this feeling that I am casting higher in the back cast, even if I don't. And there's some kind of difference in my movement when I do that. And I think perhaps it's more about it's probably more about having the correct position when I start my forward cast. I think it's probably down to that. But it's good. I mean, this is because I've been previously, I was always very sort of, I was performing really well when there was wind. When there wasn't any wind, I was not performing as well. I mean, there were others who were much better than me. So that's why I've been practicing this. I want to really, I want to be able to go to a competition and think, I don't care about the conditions. Give me any conditions you want. As long as they're the same for everyone, I'm going to be hard to beat. And I've never had that feeling before. That's where I am now. I'm like, I don't worry. And I know I can do my 38s if there isn't any wind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's I mean, that's a huge difference. I mean, I think, actually people listening to this, so I think there's a progression in there. So one of the big advances for me moving forward was to pick two targets. So to get the two targets aligned, the back target and the forward target, and to look at the target before making the cast, and then it sorted out the tracking. And that's definitely something that took me a long time to learn, and is part of the process of learning it. But I agree with you now that having done it for 15, 20 years, I don't actually have to look anymore, and it goes. I only have to check every 10 casts to make sure it's still going where it should be, because it's so ingrained that I can do it. You can do it blindfolded virtually.
Yeah.
It's going to be in the same place because you've done it hundreds and hundreds of thousands of times. So I think that's probably got to that point. And I, like you, I have also trained by not watching the back target and doing, especially on the I remember the last time I was doing it without watching. And the other thing I've tried doing it blindfold, not looking, with my eyes closed. And the carry's not too dissimilar at all, just because it's so ingrained. But
it's muscle memory, and this is the biggest challenge. This is the biggest challenge when you want to sort of let's say we want to test different small tweaks of the technique, right? And you find something that seems to be working. It takes many repetitions before it becomes ingrained in you, before it becomes a muscle memory and you just do it by heart.
And it always feels odd, doesn't it? When you first try a change, it doesn't feel right, and then you have to spend months with it until it feels right, and then you have to compare it against how it was before, because so long. It's a very long process, but quite an absorbing one. I'm sure you find. How often? I mean, I guess you're lucky in some ways that you have these really long winters in Sweden. So you are basically casting indoors.
I'd gladly swap them for longer summers and more fishing. But yeah, I mean, I'd say, the best, the thing that I'm most grateful about is basically all of the other people, like Ulrich and everyone, and Stefan and Magnus, and the fact that we're doing this together, and the fact that we're challenging each other, that's probably the most important factor in this. And we can even, you should see, there's a new guy he started, I don't know if it's his second indoor season now. He started late last season when we were indoors. This guy Tobias came and joined the club because he wanted to basically learn fly fishing. I mean, he had done it a little bit, but he wanted to learn. He's now challenging me in the 5-weight indoors. Like, wow, he has progressed from a beginner to a very, very high level. When he's hitting it, he's at a very high level.
That's amazing. What do you put that down to? Coach must be coaching.
No, I think it's the same thing. We're not there's a little bit of coaching going on. We help each other out, also a lot of visual sort of. I mean, he can see me and Magnus there, and Ulrich standing there casting every Sunday, and he can mimic and test things, and we give him advice and whatnot. So it's definitely down to the sharing, like the
Yeah.
sharing in between. It's definitely down to that. And he's now going to start this spring. He's going to start practicing spay as well. So let's see if he's as good at picking that up. So.
Oh, that's incredible. That's incredibly fast. Yeah. So you're hosting the World Championships, as I understand it, next year.
I think so.
Yeah.
I'm not sure it's been 100% decided, but I think so. Yeah, yeah.
I've always
Um,
I've always had a I've always enjoyed coming over to Sweden, is simply because, well, as you know, they're a good bunch of guys to hang out with. I remember the time and you have some amazing fishing too. I mean, I know you've just bought this cabin
yeah,
up in the
yeah,
north. How far away
yeah.
is that from the fishing grounds?
Well, it's a 2 hours 20-minute drive from home. Sorry.
How far is it from? How close is that to the places where we went fishing?
Oh, it's close, 20 minutes by car from where we were fishing.
Wow,
Yeah,
that's fantastic.
but it's a little bit more remote. It's like it's a small village that they used to live people there. I think nowadays there's two families living there sort of permanently, and
Yeah,
then there's a few people who have their summer houses there,
yeah,
right next to quite a big lake. And that lake is connected to, where we were fishing. It's the same system, but the lakes there are very, very big, so it's quite far away. But still,
and
and there's a
huge
lot of
trout.
waters there.
Hey,
Sorry?
you had that when I was there last time. You just caught that 10-pound fish. Is it 10 pounds?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Well, yeah, it was around 10 pounds. Yeah.
yeah, fantastic.
Uh, those trouts are migratory trouts. So they basically, these big lakes. That's where they spend their time.
Yeah,
That's where they live. And
yeah,
then they migrate up into these streams. Sometimes just looking for food. Sometime and then come later in the season. That's where they do their spawning. Of course, we can't fish when they're doing the spawning, but
yeah,
we can fish up until a certain date.
yeah,
But it's that kind of trout fishing is more like salmon fishing almost. It's like chucking a streamer into the water and fishing the water. Not
yeah,
really, not really. There's no side fishing or nothing involved. Like,
yeah, yeah,
but the thrill of it is when you hook something. It could be a monster.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that kind of leads into a question. So, you've been fly fishing since you said since the age of 14?
Yeah, well, that's when I tried it the first time. Then, I was spin fishing and fly fishing, sort of in general, just fishing, a lot
Yeah,
of pike fishing when I was a kid. And
and
then I had like a pause for a few years, and then I picked it up again. And then, since then, I've been doing only fly fishing.
right. And when did you start doing the competition casting?
I think 2013, 2012,
Yeah. So,
somewhere around there.
did
Yeah.
you? And so, I mean, a question that comes up quite often, is did you find, or have you found that the competition casting has helped your fishing?
Absolutely, 100%. I mean, I'm still learning when it comes to the fly fishing. I'm still learning for sure. There's still things I can improve, and situations I get into where I don't know how to solve them. And then even if if like when I was fishing with Ronan in New Zealand a couple of weeks ago when I was there, we spotted a rainbow trout, pretty sizable fish, who was standing in a very tricky spot. There was a lot of branches hanging over and whatnot. And my immediate thinking when I looked at the situation was, I need to go underneath here. I need to sort of, really come down and go close to the surface and sneak my fly in there. And I was just hammering away, and I was not being successful. And then Ronan just told me, like, you have to go, on your other axis to get around everything. And I was like, yeah, all right. And honestly, if I wouldn't have done all of my casting practices and whatnot, I would never have been able to cast like this. Now I don't, I can easily cast like this. It doesn't matter because just all of those repetitions of the movements and everything, it's so easy to adapt. I think that's the the biggest positive impact on my fishing is the adaptability I now have. Of course, it's the obvious one is some places I fish, very big waters, right?
Yeah.
So when I fish from a spot, I can fish a lot more water than the guy next to me because he can't cast as far. That's the obvious one, but that doesn't help me very often, to be honest. It's quite seldom you do those really long distance casts when you're fishing. But I can much more comfortably fish at the 20-meter mark or something. I can do that with accuracy now, which I couldn't before. But I would say the biggest one is that adaptability, where I can solve situations now that I would never have been able to if I wouldn't have done this. So
yeah, big one I find for me is dealing with the wind. The wind is never really a problem because you can carry it and you've got the line speed
correct
to deal with it. How so?
I mean, if I backtrack 10 years, when I was fishing up there in Arjeplog, where you came and visited me, there were days I wouldn't go out because it was too windy. Now there's nothing that's too windy now. It could be a hurricane. I can still go out fishing. But back then I wouldn't have been able to. I would just, entangle myself and whatever, which still happens. Yeah, it does. But Yeah.
And how was New Zealand? You were out there for a month, is that right?
Yeah, 3.5 weeks. It was amazing. We had a lot of fun. I traveled there with my ex-father-in-law, and he's 73 years old, so we couldn't do the more sort of backcountry, really advanced stuff. So we kept ourselves, fishing some of the more accessible waters. But that's the nice thing about New Zealand is that there's fantastic waters where you can park the car and almost just open the window and cast, and you catch amazing fish. So it was really, really nice. We fished, I think, every day except one while we were there. And that one day was a traveling day. We were driving. So yeah, it was amazing. It was because I was there in 2018 as well. And when I compared it to and we were fishing sort of similar areas and similar waters. But in 2018, it was much easier. If we found a fish that was feeding, we got it to take our fly 100% of the time when we were there. You had to switcheroo on your flies a little bit to figure out what it wanted, but you could get it to take the fly. They were a lot spookier now. They were a lot more selective.
Same time of year.
Yeah, exactly the same period as well of the year. So I think what one of the differences was when we were there in 2018, there was a lot of terrestrial stuff going on, so a lot of cicadas, a lot of bigger things that the fish were eating. And when we were there now, that hadn't really started yet. So I think perhaps just a bit of a difference in the season. Yeah. Maybe more pressure as well, because most of the fish you find in some of these places, they've had 1,000 casts over them. Yeah. So they become accustomed to and they've probably been hooked I don't know how many times. Yeah. So they get more aware of what's going on. So you need to be much more sneaky and stealthy, and yeah.
It's certainly changed. I mean, as you know, I used to spend 6 months a year there, but I noticed a difference in the fishing over that time. They went from being really quite ignorant and taking anything to then you had to start fishing smaller and smaller flies, but they were always very skittish, very spooky. But I think that will change again at a certain point. Like if you go to a really hard-fished European water, the fish don't spook anymore. They just don't eat. They don't eat your fly.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of the next level of it. They just instead of obviously getting spooked and swimming away, they just stand there and like, yeah, I don't care.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we found a few of those kind of almost lethargic fish, especially the bigger fish that we spotted. We could come to a pool where there was like 2 or 3 fish, and 2 of them were actively feeding, and then the big one in the pool, he was just standing there not doing anything no matter what you did, and you couldn't spook it even if you wanted to. I mean, I could almost have, if the waters would have been a little bit more shallow, I could probably walked up and tried to grab him by the tail almost.
I've tried that a few times actually.
I've tried as well, and I've been so close. I've been so close. And I really want to do it. At some point, I really want to do it.
Yeah. And did you do any night fishing when you were there?
No, we didn't actually do any night fishing.
Sometimes those real big
We,
fish, I think, just are actually.
yeah, no, that was my thinking as well. The ones that look lethargic during daytime, probably, they're very active.
Because
You know,
you night fish in Sweden, right?
yeah, for sure. That's up where you visited me. It's basically nowadays I only do night fishing there. I
Yeah,
could go out in the daytime as well, but then it's not, it's more of the experience, not expecting to catch much.
yeah,
And sometimes you do catch something during daytime as well out there, but nighttime you can catch three or four,
yeah,
and you can have really fantastic fishing.
yeah. So I have always a curious question about that one because these big fish are migratory and they run up from the lake and they go up the rivers. Do you ever catch them in the lake?
Well, don't really fish in the lake, so
I mean,
never.
do you any
But
idea?
people do, yeah, yeah, yeah,
Right.
people do.
But did you
There's
probably one or two?
there's one spot not too far away, maybe a couple of hours away from where we were,
Yeah.
where they caught in a lake, they caught a Arctic char, of almost 20, 21 pounds.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And for being an Arctic char, that's, 20-pound trout is huge,
Yeah.
right? A 20-pound Arctic char, that's off the charts huge. It's like enormous.
Oh, yeah. But that's all fishing quite deep, right? I mean,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I was wondering if you
yeah.
because sometimes I don't know what those. I mean, those big fish must be feeding on bait fish, right? I'd imagine that.
Yeah, even when they go up into the streams, that's all they feed on. I mean,
Uh,
I remember when we were there, where you met me, we were there once, and a guy was there diving. And he was diving to sort of pick up lures and stuff that's been stuck on the bottom and whatnot. So he was, drift diving, going down and picking up these things, and there was a hatch going on and everything. So, and you could see the smaller grayling were actively feeding and whatnot. And I was like, there's probably no trout in here because we would have seen something going on now because of this hatch that's happening. And the guy was diving. He was like, yeah, there's fish here. There's probably 20 big trouts just on the bottom. They're just standing there, not doing much. And then in the evenings, normally around, let's say, just before midnight, that's the earliest. And then up until 3 a.m., there's like a period when they're very active feeding. And then there's like a couple of hours where they're not, and then just before dawn
yeah.
they're actively feeding again, and then they're just feeding on these bait fish, like that's what they eat.
Yeah.
They almost 100% what they eat,
Yeah.
because I've tried all kinds of nymph fishing and whatnot, but these really big fish, they don't seem like they're eating insects almost at all, at least not there and in those situations.
Yeah. It's funny that quiet period from 2 till an hour before dawn. That one that goes dead. That's when I've actually had my biggest fish. Like everything goes really, really still. But during that period, that's when I've always had, the ones that are so big, you can't
Yeah, yeah, measure them.
nose to tail, and they get off. But no, I mean some of my biggest fish, like my biggest fish, I was in Russia, and that came during that period. Everything had just stopped rising, and I had two flies together, and I tied them as a tandem, and that's when that one came. But even back
Yeah,
in my stillwater days, that was kind of the same thing, like big fish time. But that sounds absolutely fantastic. I must come back and fish again with you guys. Maybe in that championships we can spend some time there. And you
yeah.
must come here. I've been invited
Yeah, I
to
mean, it's
for a
on it's
couple of
on
years.
my bucket list for sure. It's definitely on my bucket list to come to you and fish for snakehead and gourami, and it looks amazing.
Yeah,
Uh,
Stefan,
yeah,
he got his snake head here on the final day. It was
yeah,
it was difficult when he was here, but he had a wonderful fish, and I was
yeah,
for the video of that.
yeah. And you told me so many stories. You seem to like you had a really good time. So yeah, it's definitely on the list. But the thing is, there's a lot of things on my list.
Yeah,
A huge amount of experiences I want to do, and so little time to do them, to be honest.
So what about what's next? What's next in the whole competition side of things for you? Do you have how many competitions do you have a year?
Well, normally 3 or 4 in Sweden.
Okay.
And then normally there's some sort of international thing going on. But now there's a lot more happening. I know that the ICSF World Cup, which has previously just been casting, they're now also arranging fly casting events on the World Cup. So I think there's one in Italy in May. I would really love to go. I've become very some of the guys in the Italian team are really sort of, I got to know them. They're really nice guys, and Italy's a pretty epic place, and there's some really good fishing going on in Italy as well.
Yeah.
I'd really love to go to that competition, but I'm not sure I'll be able to because of everything else going on. And then I also know that I haven't seen the official invitation yet, but I know that Chris Corish is arranging the US Open of fly casting in August, I think. Well, look, there's going to be both casting and fly casting going on that as well.
Do you know where that is?
And sorry,
you know where that is?
I think it's at the Golden Gate Angling and Casting, perhaps, or some other. So either Los Angeles or San Francisco, one of the two.
Yeah.
And in Sweden, since we have a federation and everything, I think in Sweden there hasn't been a decision yet, but I think that Sweden will send some sort of national team there,
Wow.
which is great, of course, because then I don't have to pay for the flights and the accommodations and everything, which is that's a pretty amazing thing to have.
Yeah, you're very lucky in that regard. I think
Yeah.
Sweden and Norway and I think possibly the States as well, they actually can pay the fees for everybody to go and their flights and their accommodation. I think that's absolutely
I think
wonderful.
Italy probably also now are reaching to that point. They're very well organized and have a federation and everything. So, but this is good because this is what's needed.
Yeah.
If there's ever going to be like a World Cup tour or whatever they call it of international competitions going on, people can't afford if they have to take it from their own pocket because you have to be off work and everything as well. It's
yeah.
So that's what's needed. Every country needs to become a bit more organized and so they can fund and finance these things for the casters too.
Yeah.
Then that's probably the next step of this. If it's gonna keep growing, that's what's needed.
Yeah.
And I think also, like, we're always talking about challenges of our competitions that are sometimes it's quite unfair to people. You can be drawn to cast first in the morning and there's no wind. And then the people who cast, afternoon, they get a lot of wind, meaning people who cast in the morning can never sort of qualify for the finals. You're dead in the water, so to say. So I think, and we're always talking about, there's a lot of different ideas how to change the format to make it more, even. And they've taken one step now. Not sure it's the right one. Not sure what I think of it. Let's see when we do it for the first time. But instead of having one round in the qualifications and finals, you're going to have 2 rounds. So instead of a 1 5-minute round for trout distance, for instance, they're going to do 2 3-minute rounds. So you get, if you're drawn as the first guy out, you do your first round 3 minutes in those conditions. And then after everyone has casted, it's your turn again. So chances are you'll get a little bit, you won't just get 4 conditions. I think that's the one they're going to try now. I think it's good they're trying something. I'm not convinced it's the best thing, because the next step is also we need to make the format of the competitions more interesting for anyone who wants to watch it, right? And we need to make it more interesting. Let's say if you want to do a TV production around it.
Yeah.
Right now, it's not very even at the competitions, I feel a lot of the time, I feel like you go out there, you do your casting, and then you kind of don't know what's going on at all until someone says, all right, it's done, here's the final. Okay, I'm in the final, or
Totally agree. And I have mentioned this a few times, and I think it has to be seen from the perspective of somebody who's watching it and as an attendee, and not somebody who's competing. And there has to be somebody on a microphone explaining what's going on, explaining who, make it interesting about all the things that are interesting, who's casting, how this event happened and what he's got to do, where he is, and you can build it up. And I think there's two things in that. I think firstly, to be fairer, I think there has to be multiple goes at the cherry, but I don't think it should be necessarily just 2 rounds. I think it should be knockout.
Yeah, me too. I mean, and we don't have to reinvent the wheel here. We can look at, there are so many other sports that they've already figured this out, right?
Yeah.
We just have to look at them. And what have they figured out? Knockout rounds.
Yeah.
It makes it more exciting to watch.
Yeah.
It makes it more exciting to participate.
Yeah.
It makes it much more even because you're casting in the same conditions. Yeah. You know, it's
and knockout in the finals too. That would be even one against one. You know.
Yeah.
Finals, and then the very final is 2 people casting against each other, and I think that would be the most.
I think what's also needs to happen here is we need to look at, because we have 6 events now. Altogether, there's 6 different events, and the competitions are starting to become 4-day events almost because there's a lot of participants. I think what we need to do is we need to limit more how many people you can have from one national team, right? Exactly. So I think we can have 8 from every country now in an event. I mean, come on, 4 probably would be a good number to get over. And then we need to also look at, I mean, honestly, my view, even though I won the gold in salmon distance now, and it's a pretty fun event, we should scratch that. I mean, we've got Spey. Spey is salmon distance. That's how you fish for salmon. That's, we don't have to have no one fishes with almost anywhere with a 15-foot rod and overhand casting. That doesn't exist anymore. It's more of a casting event than a fly casting event in my book. So I think we should just ditch it, right? Should ditch it. So we have one less event. And then I think we should look at the sea trout distance event, and we should probably go down in the head weight of that. 27 grams is also quite unusual. It happens, yes, but it's quite unusual. We should probably go down.
Yep.
And by that, we could probably have events that can take longer time because they're knockout rounds at whatever, and still not, make it a 1-week event.
And what do you think about throwing over grass? Like obviously Space can't be, but 5-weight distance could certainly be done over grass. And if you did it over grass, you could have more competitors throwing at the same time, and B, instead of measuring to every half a meter, you can actually measure it centimeter.
But do you even know that this is also one thing that I think is really odd? The rules state that they measure the half meter that you actually go beyond. So you can cast, let's say 40.99, and that means 40.5. Whereas another guy can cast 40.5 exactly, and he gets the same result as you. So you're almost half a meter longer.
Wow. Well, I guess it becomes quite difficult to. It is very difficult to judge.
We've seen
trying to line up. It's actually hard enough to measure it exactly on grass. You put the fly comes in, it's not quite on the tape. You put a mark there, and then you have to stand on the tape to get it right. And there's 2 people looking backwards and forwards to get it right at 90 degrees. And
this is, I think, I mean, if we're going to continue doing it over water, let's be a bit sort of looking into the future. 10 years from now, let's say that this sport really grows and becomes a big thing. We need stadiums. If we're going to continue casting over water, we need casting pools. We need, because it's also, it's really hard for the audience to see anything when we're casting over water, because normally, Cumbria was good. You can stand on the docks and you could see exactly how far everyone's casting. But all of the other events, when you're casting out into the water most of the time, no one can see how far it went. except for the judge is sitting out there in the boat.
Yeah.
So
Can't
so
believe
we need sort of casting pools and stadiums where you can actually, it's much easier to measure then as
yeah.
well. But
Well,
I don't know. I'm a little bit torn in between here. I mean, we've been doing over grass competitions for ages in Sweden, that because we don't have, really good spots to cast over water. So we've been doing trout distance, sea trout distance, salmon distance over grass forever. Um, um, I don't know. I mean, I like when we're casting over water, I like it because it has this connection to the fishing. It's very, the same kind of thing. Because there are differences.
mm,
Like lifting the line off the water puts an extra sort of thing into the equation. And actually, on that, I have an interesting thing as well. So, in the World Championships in Norway, since I hadn't been practicing at all, normally before a championship, I would be practicing salmon distance and sea trout distance just to make sure I iron out any bad technique or whatever. Uh, and then when we came to Norway and I put together my salmon gear and went out for some practice in the evening, I couldn't cast. I was ticking in the back cast in the water all the time, and it couldn't get any distances whatsoever. I was like, all right, I don't really. I mean, this is kind of expected. I haven't been casting salmon for ages. I can't just expect that I can, you know. So then when I was there, I was like, so what should I do then? I can't go out there when it's my turn and basically just hit the back cast into the water all the time. I'm gonna look silly. So I started trying out pickup laydown. So I was like, all right, maybe I can do some pickup laydown, and I solved it. I solved so I could do pickup laydowns and I could cast quite far. I did every cast on the World Championships in Norway in salmon, pickup laydown, the whole competition, and I won I did pickup laydown on water, and I won it. Now that said, I was a little bit lucky to win it because what's his name, Steinar in the Norwegian team, he's really good in salmon, and he was casting further than me, but they were going out by half a meter. So he was casting 2 or 3 meters past my best result, but it went out with like this much. So I was quite lucky in that sense. So yeah.
Well, you set that 5-weight pickup and lay down, pickup and lay down competition. Was that 45 meters, or I can't remember what it was. 40.
Yeah, 45.8 or something.
Yeah, it's just. I mean, that's absolutely huge. And there's not. I mean,
and that's using that slipping technique that you're talking about in your fishing. It's exactly that. It's like, you need to have everything needs to be super straight, no slack anywhere, nothing, and then a very good pickup where you slip a lot and you shoot in the back cast as much as you can, and then use the body movement. So even if I shoot a little bit too much, so there's slack, then my body movements moving forward will reduce a lot of that slack and I can still hit it. So that's the key to that pickup laydown. It's definitely there.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely. I mean, that's huge. I mean, there must have been a small breeze behind you. Helping.
Oh, for sure. Conditions were good. They were not the best conditions, but it was really good conditions for sure. Because it wasn't really super strong winds. But that's the thing. I mean, my best ever practice cast in trout distance was in amazing wind conditions on a beach or on the grass just next to a beach, and the wind was coming from the ocean and towards, and then there's like this what do you call it, like a bank behind me, and the wind was kind of going upwards from there, right? So the wind wasn't straight like this, it was upwards. And I did 50.4 meters in the 5-weight in those conditions, and I've been close to 50 a couple of times. I've done some 48, 49s in not as ideal conditions. But this is the strange thing. I've also done. Me and Ulrich were doing, when we had this virtual competition during COVID. We were out doing a round, and it was getting a bit dark, and there was almost no wind. There was wind, but there was really not much wind. And I did over 47 in not much wind, which is also one of those where you go, oh my God, what just happened? because
Yeah.
because we were doing like one was casting, the other one was measuring. So he was standing on the field and he was standing around the mark where we were hitting, and it was hitting like 40, 39, 40 was what we were hitting. And then all of a sudden the line just goes past him like this. And he's like, whoa.
Yeah.
And I don't know. It's that's one of the mysteries and one of the things that makes you want to continue to figure this out is how
Absolutely.
can you reproduce that? How can you
Yeah.
consistently do those perfect casts?
There's so long as there's always one that goes further, that's the one that's what you keep chasing, isn't it?
Yeah, it is for sure.
It's always been like that. I just didn't know really where the end was, particularly indoors. So I mean that I still think indoors 120 feet's actually, a
Oh,
really
that's
good
really good.
is a really
That's
good
a
cast.
fantastic cast indoors. I
But
mean, that's yeah,
you've got some. What was the longest one there? You said it was 130, is 137 you had.
yeah.
I mean,
But
that's
that's one cast, one time.
right.
Uh,
So it's
because
possible.
now I can see that the and that was where we're practicing indoors. They renovated that building a couple of years ago, and this was before that renovation. And they've done there's something that's different. It's harder to cast as far because I remember then, I mean, okay, I probably wasn't as good, but I remember like Frederick and Stefan and Ulrich were doing, most of the time they were hitting 36 meters, like 100, around 120 feet when they were hitting it. And they were doing that not just once, they were doing it quite sort of consistently. Uh, no one, they're not doing that consistently indoors in the new place that we're in. But I can see on my own cast, because I've done a lot of practicing to become more consistent. Maybe that's taken away those one timers that go really far. I don't know. I don't think so, but but what's definitely happened is previously when I was practicing indoors, if I messed up a cast, like I did a poor cast, it would go to 28, 29, 30. Now those they go 33, 34. The bad casts are at that mark. And the average, when I'm casting like I normally do, it's 37, 38. And then the really good ones are like, I've been this far away from 40 so many times, so many times. You hit it and you go, yes, I finally did it. And you run up and you see, well, there's 1 or 2 centimeters left. And I'm like, oh, come on. And also, of course, we were using the Rio tournament line before.
Yeah.
And I think that 137 one was with the Rio. It wasn't with the MED line. So
Okay.
that's also one thing, in the equation here. The Rio line goes further. That's
Yeah.
without a doubt. And when we changed the rules in Sweden, because we used to have 3 lines for trout distance, and it was the MED, it was the Rio, and it was one of the Barrio lines.
One, two,
And
five.
when we changed it, so it was only MED, I had to start practicing with the MED, which I hadn't done a lot of, to be honest. And that took me better part of a year to sort of to feel I could, have the confidence that I can throw far with the MED line as well, because I was throwing really far with the Rio, but the MED I was throwing okay, but I wasn't really, I wasn't beating Magnus and Stefan and the guys. So it took me better part of a year to sort of really get into casting with the MED line. And before as well, I don't know if there's something that changed with the production or something, but during a period, I could have 10 MED lines, one that was fantastic, a couple that was okay, and then some that just couldn't cast with them. Like it was almost like hitting a wall at 32 with them. That isn't the case anymore. I have 10 lines now. They're all equal. There's not much difference in my result. I can pick any one of them and put it on and go, and I can hit those good casts. So I don't know if it's me or if it's the production of the lines, or if I was just lucky with this batch. Or
Yeah. No, I mean, I do know they certainly had some lines that were kind of different. I mean, different weights, different thicknesses of running lines. There was definitely variability in there, but they must have obviously improved that a bit, I think. but because we got sent quite a few and I measured them all, and there was some that were definitely different weights. There was one that was quite a lot heavier, and I thought,
Yeah,
oh,
I've had one of those as well.
this is what we want, thicker running line.
One that
That's the end of part 1. Part 2 will follow.